Go Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Man of Revolution. And we got a World War III alert. But before we get into the end of that, be sure to wipe your feet. Hit the like button. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, revolution is a way of life, and revolution is for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So here I am with some revolutionary late night dinner for y'all, doing my part to keep this channel going. Let's get into it.
Southern California. Now, these people join all those who have already been evacuated for all of these fires. 38,000 acres combined, and the death toll right now around 24 and rising every day. Now we have a visualization from CBS News of how these fires spread. Here is a map put together by the local CBS News.
Yeah, so take a look at this. You can see the Palisades fire where it started on January 7th. Expanding here just from 2,900 acres initially. January 8th, look at it moving back over the hillside there. Absolutely devastating. January 8th, further that night, just climbing up that hill. Just horrible to look at.
This is exactly what we've experienced, this rapid spread, and it's expected to continue to go. Right now, the numbers, the estimates of just the Palisades fire being contained are between 10 and 15%, with conditions expected to worsen. Now, the National Weather Service has predicted, they're calling this explosive fire growth. That's not a word you want to see with a fire that is not contained, has killed dozens, and is continuing to claim people's entire lives. Keyword here, explosive. Now, something we don't want to hear, again, since these fires have not been contained. Now, here's the National Weather Service this week, again, warning of red flag conditions in Southern California that could make the fire situation worse. Okay, this one probably we're going to take pretty seriously, but let's rewind the clock 10 days before these massive fires broke out. And we actually did have a warning from them on January 2nd. That looked like this: potential fire risk, Santa Ana winds. All the things we now knew contributed to this was in fact warned about with extreme fire conditions on August 2nd. The next day, Los Angeles Mayor Bass flew to Ghana, even though she said she would not travel abroad if she was elected as mayor. The New York Times called her out for this over the weekend. From a 2021 interview at the Times, she said that if she was elected mayor, not only would I, of course, live here, but I would also not travel internationally. The only places I would go would be DC, Sacramento, San Francisco, and New York in relation to LA.
Wait till they find out that she went over there to get her citizenship. Remember, because Dr. Umar Johnson did the same bullshit, and so does some other people. The Love and Hip Hop couple, DC and old girl, the Cameron Stylist, she went over there too. Wait till they find out that's what Karen Bass went to Ghana for. They gonna tell her ass apart. You went over there to get your African citizenship. That's what she was there for. While LA was on fire, they gonna rip her ass to shreds when they find out that she went there to get citizenship.
Heck, did she go to Ghana? And in fact, she's been abroad 5 times since being elected. She went to the Mexican president's inauguration. 3 times she went to the Olympics in France. And then, of course, to Ghana the day after this massive warning. Instead of monitoring the situation or warning residents or checking in on the water supply or anything of the sort, nope, she thought, that's nice. Got my passport ready, bye. She did not think that the Weather Service warning was serious enough, I guess, to cancel that trip. Now, Gavin Newsom also wasn't focused on this warning either, because his office issued this press release about processed foods the day after that warning. So they were not warning residents. they were not monitoring. Journalist Michael Schellenberger, who covers Newsom's constant efforts to destroy the ecosystem in the state under the name of environmentalist, he says that Newsom could have sent up helicopters to put out small fires to make sure it didn't come to this. Nobody did anything except sit and wait, and thus that's why we are here. Now, there's speculation that this fire was started by fireworks after New Year's Eve. We don't know that yet. We do know arson is a problem, not just now because of opportunists who want to light fires and then loot anyone who is evacuated. Arson is a problem because of illegal immigration and because of homelessness. And we're going to prove that to you in a second. But there was a man who was arrested late last week with proof that he was trying to start a fire. And now we know that he was, of course, an illegal immigrant. That's been confirmed by ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. They identified him as a Mexican national who is in the United States illegally. He was tackled by Southern Californian residents, not the police, as he was trying to start a fire with a blowtorch. In the video, you can't hear it here, but they're saying, you need to stop this. And he continues to say, I'm going to do this. Yes, I'm going to do this. He's literally caught red-handed with a blowtorch, but he's being held right now on a felony probation violation. But since California is a sanctuary state, ICE told Fox News that they can't detain him for long because City Council passed an ordinance last November that prohibits the use of city resources and personnel to carry out federal immigration enforcement. They cannot deport him. They cannot hold him. He's here illegally. He's allowed to start fires. It's totally cool. Can you imagine living in Los Angeles and knowing that your taxpayers have to support this guy who is trying to set your neighborhood on fire, your entire city on fire? He will appear in court today, but they say they don't have enough evidence and probable cause to charge him with arson, despite the video that you just watched where he's holding a blowtorch. That's not enough evidence.
I mean, let's be fair. How often, I mean, we all are guilty of just walking down the street with an active blowtorch. Just
with a blowtorch. Yeah.
In the middle of a massive fire problem. Yeah.
I carry a flamethrower.
Yeah.
But
you have a massive jetpack like size flamethrower. You just bring out occasionally when you want to clear some brush on your way to work.
Caddyshack too. I do that. Yes. Another video.
Rambo.
So another video is making the rounds now of another homeless person in Southern California who looks like he's about to start a fire. Although he says he's trying to put it out after he says, no, actually, I was just trying to stay warm. When he's confronted, clearly this is a person who is half a bubble off plum, if you know what I mean. You can watch for yourself.
Hey, brother, why you do this, bro? Nah, bro, you going to jail, bro. Oh, the whole trash can on fire, bro. Who did it then? Who did it?
Whoa.
Who did it?
Put it out, man. You did what? Fire truck. You did this.
He's trying to put it out.
That's what he
looks
says.
like a firefighter. Trying to put it out, man.
But then he says, actually, I was just trying to keep warm. Like I said, he's not dealing with a full deck of cards, this person, clearly. Now, whether or not they're doing this, either criminals or homeless people or immigrants, whether they're doing this because they want to stay warm or because they're opportunists and they want to evacuate neighborhoods so that they could rob them, it almost doesn't matter. Michael Schellenberger has been pointing this out for a long time, that homeless people start fires in a place where there's a fire hazard, but California legislators won't admit it. They have a homeless population that they have allowed to explode, and that is a fire risk. Watch.
And instead of emptying the prisons and jails, subsidizing rampant homelessness, eliminating penalties for breaking the law, and allowing addicts, the mentally ill, and others to camp everywhere and start fires, Newsom and Bass should have cracked down on the rampant disorder and violent crime, all of which have skyrocketed under their misrule. It now appears that at least one of the fires was started by a homeless man. And whether or not that proves to be the case, over half of all fires put out by the LA Fire Department are started by the homeless, which has diverted the agency from doing what it should have been doing, which was to prevent catastrophic fires, including by putting them out as soon as they start.
Okay, half of fires that LAPD is busy concerning themselves with are fires started on the street by the homeless population that has been allowed to run rampant under Democratic legislators. Can these policies fail any harder in full view? What does it take, Californians, to turn against these liberal idiots? You tell me why this is acceptable. I really need to understand why you would see this and be like, it's not Democrats' fault.
Do you need Gavin Newsom to come to your house and shoot your pets? Like, would that be the catalyst?
Right.
You finally wake up?
What exactly about this is acceptable? You pay high taxes, you subsidize homeless people, they start fires, you allow the fire department to cut their budget, focus on DEI,
You vote
empty the water.
You vote for water bonds that are 14 years back in 2014 that still haven't been implemented to actually save your communities. You voted for reservoirs. You voted for all of this. And
you allow Gavin Newsom to turn off your nuclear power plants, which would allow you to continue to run these reservoirs efficiently and desalinate water. You want none of this? You're totally cool. You're just going to vote for a different Democrat. I need to understand
you mentioned
the mental gymnastics that would allow you to say this is acceptable.
You also said subsidizing homeless people, but you're also subsidizing massive amounts of illegal immigrants, of course, with sanctuary cities and the illegal immigrants who've been caught on camera now committing arson that we can't do anything about because of these sanctuary laws in the state. We'll get to more of that in a second. By the way, let's talk about smart meters, shall we?
A lot of us are trying to get our finances in order to start the year off right. And interest rates are starting to drop finally now that the Federal Reserve has allowed it. So if you've been buried in high interest credit card debt, right now is a good time to break free. American Financing can help you access the cash in
all of this. For catching fire, sending homes up in flames. That's what many Californians are saying today with their large lithium-ion batteries that are inside of these smart meters. Maybe they've come out to your house and said, hey, do you want to upgrade? We're going to upgrade your house to a smart meter. And a lot of people saying, don't. Absolutely don't do this. Don't agree to it. You'll have to pay for them to come out once a month and check your meter now with one of those old manual sort of analog meters. But the problem with these smart meters is, well, they can go up in flames. That's the problem. And there's historical precedent for it, by the way. And PG&E has faced massive lawsuits because of these smart meters starting house fires. When there was no other fire around, these things going up in smoke. And it happens. Just take a look at this. Is an example of these smart meters because of the flow of electricity to the house and these lithium-ion batteries, which are massively incendiary. You can see them sparking and going off here. And dozens of people have blamed smart meters for fires over the last several years in California. The issue has been a topic of discussion in front of the California Public Utilities Commission. Now, they came along and said, we don't see enough evidence to support that that was the cause of it. Well, PG&E still had to deal with massive lawsuits around this, and they ended up having to pay up big time because of it. One man and a fire chief claimed that at one house when one was on fire, a PG&E employee just like showed up while the fire chief was there. Like the PG&E truck rolls up, and the PG&E employee goes over and removes the burnt like smart meter from the house. He's like, evidence
was never here.
Let me take this home with me, and you didn't even see me. I'm going away. Bye, PG&E guy.
I wonder if he replaced it with something else. Did he replace it with something else, or did he just like they're just like, huh, that's weird. There's no meter on this house.
Never was.
Meter? Put back one of those old manual ones again. Let me be right. Or he put up like a faux Lego one, just like a Lego version of it. You know.
Okay.
It'd be all like brand new with all the scorch marks behind it. Like we don't know where the fire came from. Definitely not this brand new electric meter.
Exactly. So this PG&E employee arrived on the scene and removed the smart meter from the house. Don't take my word for it. Take ABC News, who actually did the reporting on this. Watch.
Tens of thousands in damage. And firefighters determined this is where it started. A few months later, in September 2015, another fire started in a similar spot at this fireball home. And Jose Valdez says he had a sinking suspicion that day.
A month before the house caught on fire, PG&E had came and left us a little flyer saying they were going to come out and install a new smart meter in our house.
Valdez says he and his family cleared out of the house safely, and they could only watch the flames spread from the side of their garage.
This is the charge for my neighbor's car that was burned here.
While firefighters doused the house in water, they say they also noticed several people from PG&E. Valdez says one of them removed the smart meter while the house was still burning. Fireboss fire chief saw the same thing. He says his investigation concluded the fire was most likely caused by a problem in the electrical panel.
And that problem with an electrical panel, in my belief, was the smart meter that was installed in the panel by PG&E.
Oh, yeah, I don't see the humor in it either. Like as someone in our chat said, literally shows up while the house is on fire. So they knew what was going on. They went and removed the meter to try to hide the evidence.
Well, the smart meter told them,
right.
This house is on fire. Go get me out of here.
So why would they do that? California is saying the homes without smart meters haven't burned down at nearly the level that homes outfitted with these smart meters have. Here is Matt Landman, who posted this. Smart meters have lithium-ion batteries. When these batteries catch fire, they have what's called thermal runaway, where they will go from 140 degrees Fahrenheit to 6,000 degrees Fahrenheit in just a few seconds. The smart meter is connected to the copper wiring of the home, which is designed to travel electricity due to its conductivity. Along with being conductive, the copper wires are also great at heat transfer via convection. So when these supposed forest fires hit neighborhoods but burn more homes than trees, the culprit in the usual fire forensics looks to be the lithium-ion batteries. It's no wonder these homes are burned to dust while trees are standing within feet of the houses. These homes are burning from the inside out. Literally, the copper wires in the homes are insulated, carrying extreme heat to every corner of the home. Welcome to Agenda 2030, he says. And here's an example of one of those houses. Watch.
This right here, that's a smart meter going off and catching fire.
So I talked to the owner of this house right here in Pasadena. I talked to the owner. The owner does not have a smart meter on this house, on the front part of his house. There's no smart meter, no smart meter. So the house did not burn. The back house is the part of the house that had the smart meter, and everything in the back of his house is burnt. No smart meter, smart meter.
Someone in the chat says, I believe the smart meters burnt down. John Butterball Sr. says, I believe smart meters burned Paradise, California. Yeah, John, you're correct. You're one step ahead of me here. In fact, manslaughter. PG&E pled guilty to 84 counts of manslaughter in the fire that devastated Paradise, California. And they had to basically plead guilty to 84 counts of manslaughter in that 2018 wildfire that devastated the town. So now leave it to politicians, of course, to turn tragedy into a cash grab. California Governor Gavin Newsom just set a new low in exploiting this disaster. I don't know if you've seen his tweets over the past couple of hours or past couple of days. He's been pushing people to go to a California wildfire, CaliforniaFireFacts.com, which basically redirects right to GavinNewsom.com. And he's encouraging people to go there. He took to Twitter to basically ask for donations to support fire relief efforts. Okay, but here's the kicker. The donations are actually routed through his own super PAC, according to the New York Post. So anyone who clicks the link to help fire victims isn't just giving money. They're being added to a prized email list that then Newsom's super PAC can then milk for political donations and profit from data sharing operations. Sleazy.
Damn.
Unbelievable.
Absolutely it is. But not surprising at all from Gavin Newsom. It gets worse, though. The fundraising platform that Newsom used is called Act Blue. Skims a flat three. Remember Act Blue? Have you heard all about Act Blue under James O'Keefe's operation and uncovering the shadiness there? They skim a flat 3.95%, basically almost a 4% fee off of every donation. So you donate through this super PAC basically set up that Gavin Newsom has structured, Act Blue. The Democrats make almost 4% off of every donation, which then goes to line their pockets. It goes to push like anti-Trump policies. It goes to push progressive agendas. It's not helping fire victims. It's disgusting. And they don't, openly admit this, of course. That means money intended to help fire victims basically ends up bankrolling Democratic candidates in the state of California and around the country. And agendas, including those pushing for foreign wars and destabilizing entire regions around the world. So do you think you're helping California fire victims? It's just disgusting. Meanwhile, the fire crisis in California has claimed 24 lives. Families are grieving. Communities are shattered. Instead of ensuring that every penny goes to these relief efforts, Newsom's fundraiser could divert these funds to political campaigns. And here's Gavin Newsom in this interview now. Of course, a lot of people are making a big deal out of this, myself included, that we were all concerned about, well, what is going to happen to these cities once the rebuilding starts? Was it planned for like 15-minute cities? massive restructuring of California, land grabs by real estate developers and so forth for people that didn't want to move or whatever. So here Gavin Newsom on Meet the Press is discussing his plans for California 2.0. He basically already has a Marshall Plan in place, which we'll talk about in a second. Watch.
The opportunity, I think, to rebuild at the same time. And that's why we're already organizing a Marshall Plan. We already have a team of looking and reimagining LA 2.0. And we're making sure everyone's included, not just the folks on the coast.
Yeah, everyone. So we got a Marshall Plan in 1948 to rebuild Europe after World War II, of course. And, we know what happened there, of course, basically under the thumb of the United States for decades to come and currently. And the amount of money that needed to be paid back to the United States, of course, the amount of debt that the UK had to the United States up until, I think, just a few years ago for this rebuilding effort under this Marshall Plan. Some are calling it a martial law plan, not like John Marshall. And so rebuilding these cities, these sort of 15-minute cities, these new smart cities. What is LA 2.0? And by the way, you already had a team? Like you have a team ready to go? You have a team that's already reimagining?
You didn't under the threat of fire, but once everything's burned down, you have an expertise. That's
you have a Marshall Plan in place.
No.
All right, more news to get to here in a second. Do you ever have a feeling you're being surveilled and hesitate to share things of interest via text message or email with your friends and loved ones? Well, recently, outspoken parents at a PTA used the offer code REDACTED to and specifically Section 702. Now, she's pledged to support the warrantless spying on Americans. Wait, what? Why now? What happened? What the hell happened? This is really disappointing for supporters of like ourselves who've supported Tulsi Gabbard as head of DNI. We've called out, of course, the money that she's taken from the Israel lobby. But overall, we've been excited for her to be a part of this. I just finished reading her book over the holidays, and there's a lot to love about her. But this massive flip-flop on FISA is deeply, deeply concerning. So as Caitlin Johnstone says, quote, once you step into the machinery of power, it's not uncommon to see initial opposition to the imperial status quo, be it surveillance, authoritarianism, or military intervention, she says, morph into support for those very practices. The system either excludes dissenters or it compels them to adapt. So is that what happened here? What do you guys think? I'll ask you guys who are watching right now. Do you think that once she got in there, in order to be confirmed, she sort of, bent the knee, said, I'm gonna support this. I'm gonna support the surveillance state. Even though while she was in Congress, she said absolutely not. So now Tulsi is pledging to support Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act as part of her efforts to secure confirmation as Biden's top pick for the Director of National Intelligence. And just to be clear, this highly controversial provision allows for the warrantless surveillance of Americans,
which she herself has said she's been a victim of.
Yes. I mean, with the NSA spying on her and actually putting her on a list. Like,
yes.
You think, okay, this is the person you want to go in there and clean house on this stuff.
Right. And as she promised she would.
It's like Stockholm syndrome. Like,
Yeah.
seriously, like she just got so close to it all that now she wants the bad things. Yeah, I don't get it.
It infringes on American civil liberties. Like, this is a full stop for me. It's a full stop for us here on this show. I don't want to speak for my wife, but it's a full stop for me.
You don't?
I don't want to speak for you. Unless I need to. During her time in Congress, Gabbard was a vocal opponent of the law, advocating vociferously for its repeal. And she gives some great speeches on it, by the way. So I just don't understand what's going on here. We spoke with former FBI whistleblower Kyle Seraphin, who's made it he was kicked out of the FBI for blowing the whistle on this very program and the warrantless surveillance of Americans and raising red flags about what the FBI is doing. The FBI ruined his life for calling attention to this. And he specifically is focused on 702 of FISA. He's made his mission to educate people about this. He's been doing a great job. So listen to how he describes how nefarious this is.
The NSA's database of 702 data, which is literally me looking into your email box. People have to understand what raw FISA is. It's exactly what you see. I get your spam. I get the notes back and forth to your mom. I get the notes that you and your wife are exchanging, which is otherwise privileged material, and your lawyers. I see all of it raw with no filter. And then I, as an FBI agent, have to decide whether or not it is, in fact, something that I have to, quote unquote, minimize. And I'll just tell you, as someone who did this for 2 years in a skiff working against the Chinese threat, I have a pretty high IQ. I'm a better than average learner. And I sat in that skiff and I thought I was minimizing things appropriately by using the protocols that were taught to me. By the way, I had a native Chinese speaking agent as a training agent who didn't know how to use the programs either. And it didn't seem like anybody on my squad knew how to use them. So when they did a FISA audit of me on my squad about what I had been doing with 702 FISA, I failed it miserably. And so did everybody else because we weren't minimizing it properly, because it doesn't even do the thing you think. When you click through the minimization process, it doesn't result in it actually doing the thing that it's supposed to do within that software.
He's right. So Section 702, which was first enacted in 2008, permits U.S. intelligence agencies to collect and monitor the communications of foreign targets without a warrant, of course, even if those communications incidentally, though, involve Americans. Privacy advocates have long called for its repeal because it's overly broad, citing abuses, massive overreach. So why this reversal from Tulsi? It's deeply troubling. It's clear that this move underscores the influence of the national security state. Right? Someone's like, what do you mean by bent the knee? Well, it's like when you go before a king and you get down on one knee and you like bow in front of them. Like, what's going on here? Is that exactly what she did? Who knows? So I'm just stunned that she's had this massive reversal.
All right, let's talk about the Macrons. I just want to say I don't like this story.
I love it.
It's gross. It's weird. It may, though, be important because it is yet more proof that liberal leaders are perverts.
Yes.
Which
yes.
we seem to uncover all the time. Right. And so that's why we're going to do it. You like it?
I love it.
Okay.
Because every time I see a picture of Bridget Macron, I'm like, no woman walks around like that. No woman sits like that. What's going on here with this story? Like, it's the most bizarre. Anyway, go ahead. Just
okay.
To get into it. Yeah. No more.
I could defend that. We won't. Okay, let's look at what the news is. Okay, the news is that Candace Owens says she's been threatened with litigation by French President Emmanuel Macron and his wife Brigitte Macron because Owens says she has evidence that the First Lady is a biological man who raped Emmanuel Macron when he was 15 years old. This post where she exposes that has been viewed at least 12 million times, and it's trending in France. It's not trending in the United States. We got a lot to deal with, but it is big news in France because it could be the scandal of a decade with a leader who has, tanked their economy, repealed freedom to say a man is a man and a woman is a woman, supported death in Ukraine, endless wars, right? I don't think most of us would agree that Emmanuel Macron is an excellent leader. And why is he this terrible leader? Could it be because he has these skeletons in his closet? That's where we're going with this, right? So what she says here is that she has interviewed a French journalist at length who has copious research showing that Brigitte Macron was born a man and changed to Brigitte Macron. Not only that, but how her relationship started with Emmanuel Macron when he was her student. She was in her mid-30s and he was only 15 at the time. The way that the Macrons have presented their story is that, yes, they met when he was a 15-year-old high school student. Yes, she was the teacher, but they waited until he was 17, as if that was better, until they started a consensual relationship. And then they got married when he was in his 20s. So she's still at least a decade and a half older than him, but they've sort of presented a different story. But in their letter to Candace Owens, they say that, in fact, their relationship was legal and consensual because he was 15 at the time. That not only changes the story, but it's untrue because of the teacher-student relationship. Now, she says that she's being pressured by this threatening letter. She's being threatened because they don't want her to release this expose, which she is still planning to release at the end of January. Here she is explaining how this... So let's set aside whether or not Brigitte Macron is a biological man, but this age of consent is also an explosive revelation and breaks apart what they said on the campaign trail. Watch Candace Owens explain this.
What on earth were they thinking, including that? Okay. But here's where it gets really interesting. Okay. Then they insist on explaining to me that calling someone a rapist in France, they have different laws, and they insist that it's not statutory rape because Emmanuel was or would have been 15. They heavily imply this. This is the exact verbiage from the letter. It reads, Mrs. Macron did not statutorily rape President Macron. Let us be clear that the age of consent in France is 15. The two met and fell in love in 1993 when she was a drama teacher and he was 15 years old. When President Macron was 17, he vowed to marry Mrs. Macron, following through with his promise. They wed in 2007 when President Macron was 29 years old. Now, I want to first let you guys know that this is stunning because all throughout the time that President Macron was running, their story was that he was 17 years old. Okay. Now we have here writing that they're now adjusting that. All the publications said, oh, he was 17. It makes him sound like he's almost legal. And she was, however, I think they said she was 34. And one of the things that we told you was that this whole legend that they created in the legacy media was dishonest, and they allowed this to go on and go on until people started looking, independent journalists, and going, wait a second, Emmanuel Macron was not 15. And I also believe there's an interview where Emmanuel Macron states that he met her before he was 15 years old. But them implying that the age of consent in France is 15 is actually wholesale dishonesty, because what they're leaving out is the age of consent at that time when they were together was 15 only if the person that they had the affair with, the sexual affair with, was not someone who had any power or control. That is still the law in France today, okay? So in order for it to be age of consent, it cannot be a teacher, it cannot be a therapist, it cannot be any person when you are a minor that has control over you. And as they mentioned in that same paragraph, Emmanuel Macron was the student of Brigitte Macron. So that would not have been allowed under the law. And this is something that we are happy to debate. In America, this would be statutory rape one way or the other. And in France, I'm pretty sure that still constitutes statutory rape, but we will allow you to respond to that in a more thorough manner, because now that we've established a connection, you have no excuse not to answer our pointed questions.
Okay.
Ouch.
Now, something that she points out in this video, which is about 20 minutes or so, she says, the Macrons have repeatedly attacked journalists for exposing this or looking into it, but they have not put any effort into proving it, that she's a biological woman. So where are the pictures of her pregnant with her children? Where are pictures of her, you know, as a baby, or medical records or what have you? She says they only attack the sources as if they can tamp out the fire instead of actually proving it, when this is something that could be proven and done with, and that they're not doing it. And that's one of the reasons that Macron is so and it is so committed to closing X in France. So
they've already blocked Rumble in France.
Right.
So, you know, they really want to clamp down on free speech. Anyone who wants to expose the corruption and the sleaziness of the Macron legacy, you know, Rumble gets shut down in France. X, they're trying great lengths to try to stop as well.
Yeah.
How many other social media platforms, I don't know, that they're going after, you know?
Right. So it's much less about whether or not she looks mannish. There's a lot of women that look mannish. I don't care about that. I do absolutely care if this is some grooming scandal that has given us this leader that has tanked an economy and for lack of a better word, done his people wrong because he's ideologically captured by perverts. So that in and of itself, like, no 15-year-old should be dating their 30-something-year-old teacher. I think we should pretty much all agree on that, right?
I'm just laughing because Baron Saturday says, Einhorn is Finkel. Finkel is Einhorn. Einhorn is
I get what you're saying.
Ace Ventura reference.
That's pretty good.
Is always welcome.
Pretty
on
good.
the show. Immigrant caught setting fires in California. And guess what? ICE says they can't hold him. You can't make this up. Really, I mean, it's like, truth is stranger than fiction. And things are expected to get much worse with return of 100-mile-an-hour winds today, which basically means there's nothing that firefighters can really do to stop it. Aircraft can't fly. Firefighters can't battle these blazes with these Santa Ana winds that high. But don't worry, Gavin Newsom, of course, says he's going to start cutting red tape and regulation so that Californians can rebuild as quickly as possible. He's excited right now for California 2.0, as he's calling it. He just tweeted this, just issued an executive order that will allow victims of the SoCal fires to not get caught up in bureaucratic red tape and quickly rebuild their homes. Right. Well, what about all the liberal red tape that led to their homes being burned down in the first place? Like, where were you when that, was all happening? Someone who's called out these policies from the beginning is Kaizen Asiedu. He last week, this video went viral for calling out these failed liberal policies. Watch.
Last night, I had to evacuate my home in LA because of the fires, the effects of which you can see right above me. Upon reflecting, I remembered a conversation that Joe Rogan had with Donald Trump before the election about the state of wildfire management in California. It's very easy to think of wildfires as something that Mother Nature just inflicts upon us, but we have an influence over both the intensity and the frequency of these fires. And Donald Trump pointed out that there's two things that we've done in California that might be exaggerating the effects of these fires. The first is our policy around water management, and the second is our policy around clearing deadwood in our forests.
And Kaizen joins us now from California. He's managed to get out of that area and is safe, but he is calling attention to all of these failed liberal policies and what it has done to the state of California. Kaizen, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So when you see Gavin Newsom making these statements about now they're going to start cutting red tape, he's excited about California 2.0. We're going to rebuild. We have a Marshall Plan in place. It almost sounds like a lot of this was strategic and kind of planned from the beginning, and these liberal policies really led to this disaster. You've been calling this out, right?
Yeah, the problem is when there's so much incompetence, it becomes hard to distinguish that from malevolence. So people start to reasonably wonder, hey, was this planned or are you just that incompetent? And it's scarier to consider that it's planned. It's safer to consider that they're just incompetent. But regardless, the solution is the same. We need competent, accountable leaders. And honestly, I think a lot of this, for me personally, would go over better from Gavin Newsom if he just acknowledged, hey, I messed up and I'm sorry. And there's things that I need to do better. But instead, what I see him doing is picking fights with Trump on X and picking fights with Elon, who is sending Starlinks and Cybertrucks of his own volition to help out with connectivity for the firefighters. I see him talking about misinformation and complaining about misinformation and doing press interviews and going on podcasts. And not a single time have I heard him just say, hey, look, I am the head of state in California. There are things I clearly overlooked here. I am the person who the buck stops with, and I'm going to do better. And if I saw that, then it would be easy for me to be like, okay, you know what? Being a governor is actually a very difficult job. There's no world where 100% of the people are going to approve of what you did, but at least I can see a culture of growth and humility, but I'm not seeing that at all. So I totally understand why some people speculate that this is planned. I try to remain agnostic on this stuff because I genuinely don't know. What I do know is that the actions that have been taken are not the actions that we need.
Right. So you called out a series of policies which have gotten us here. So these are facts. These are on the books. And there's empty reservoirs. There's a water bond that hasn't been fulfilled that California voters voted for. There's incompetence up and down the line. Can you just talk about some of the incompetence for people who are like outside of California might not understand how bad it's been? These are facts. This is not like emotion talking here. These are facts, right?
Yeah, exactly. So there's several issues going on here. One, the fire hydrants that were needed in the Pacific Palisades fire specifically, many of them were dry. Now, there's a few factors going on. Some people have said water shortage. I don't think it's as simple as that. But basically, our urban water infrastructure is not designed to accommodate infernos of this magnitude. And here's the thing. It's like a lot of these leftist politicians keep on saying climate change is such a big problem. Climate change is going to kill us. Climate change is something we need to get under control. And it's true that the climate is changing and we need to adapt. But to the extent that that's true, they haven't adapted properly. So you can't say on one hand, the conditions are not favorable, and on the other hand, we haven't prepared properly for the conditions. So when our firefighters are going to fire hydrants in their dry, or we have dead trees on our forest floors, which are highly flammable material, leading to these infernos becoming much more disastrous than they need to, and we have our fire departments not only understaffed and under budget, but spending money on policies that are just not the priority, like diversity, equity, and inclusion. I look at this issue and I say, okay, well, this fire probably was not preventable because it was a perfect storm. Now, we are dealing with 100-mile-per-hour winds. It is an extreme situation, but even extreme situations that have a 10 out of 10 level of destruction could be brought down to maybe an 8 or a 7 through diligent policy. And I think what's pretty clear, hopefully is what's clear to people who are paying attention, is that these policies are not policies but prepare us the best for these conditions. And one of the videos that I made that went viral was about the Delta smelt, which is this endangered fish that is in the San Joaquin Delta, and how there was an environmental lobby and conservationists who wanted to redirect fresh water away from that fish in order to protect the fish. But that led to us dumping nearly 200 billion gallons of water into the Pacific Ocean. That's water with a monetary value. That's water that we can use to fill reservoirs. And I look at that, it's like, that's not the direct cause of these fires, and no one is disputing that. And in fact, we can even argue that if we still had that 200 billion gallons of water, we couldn't have channeled it through the infrastructure quickly enough to the fire hydrants. Okay, but it's indicative of a worldview where the priorities are just completely out of whack. That's the core problem here. These politicians are focusing on political talking points and what sounds good, like we need to have a diverse workforce, and we need to have a head of equity at LAFD, and we need to focus on all these things that are just not the most important thing. And I'm not saying they're not important to anyone. Like, of course, we would love to have an LA fire department that is diverse if that doesn't sacrifice merit. But right now, we're in a situation where we're not dealing with the core safety needs. We're not laser focused on merit, and everyone's safety is being compromised, black, brown, yellow, or everything in between.
Right. If your house is on fire, do you care if the person coming to save you looks like you, acts like you, votes like you?
No, I care that they can, if I'm crippled, pick me up and get me out of the fire. I care that they're the best person in LA to do the job. I care that we know that they've been trained and they're properly funded and that they trust everyone on the team around them. That's what I care about. And if they're also diverse while also meeting those sets of criteria, great. But the skepticism among me and many other Californians about whether even that's the case.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm 6'2". If someone that comes to my house looks like Shaquille O'Neal to save me, I'm like, fabulous, wonderful. You could probably pick up all my family members and carry them out simultaneously. I'm all for that. I don't care what you look like. I want my house saved. And if you got the job based on merit, wonderful. But you're right. The policies in California have been so focused on DEI and diversity, equity, and inclusion that they've really destroyed. I mean, we're seeing this across the country. This is not just a California problem. Then we also have issues with illegal immigration, of course, in California. And now the reports, I saw your tweet today, said, let me get this straight. An illegal immigrant was arrested by citizens, not the police. That's a major problem. First of all, we see the citizens arrest of one of these individuals who was setting a fire. That's a major problem right there. Then you said he was already on probation, meaning he had already been arrested before the LA fires by the police. Second big problem, right? During the LA fires, he was caught near a fire with a blowtorch. So these are policy problems. That's not climate change.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And when our government fails, citizens need to fill the gap. And that's when problems start to obtain. So, for example, a few months ago, we had the Daniel Penny, Jordan Neely situation. You remember on the New York City subway, there was a white Marine. He restrained a black homeless guy. People racialized it, but it was fundamentally a safety issue. And it's tragic that Jordan Neely died and the state failed him. And also, he was a guy who had been arrested 42 times. He had assaulted 3 women at or on the subway, and he was threatening to kill people on the subway. So if the law is not taking care of situations like this, then now citizens need to step in. And imagine if citizens had stepped in and then this illegal immigrant had gotten hurt or one of the citizens had gotten hurt. So it's just a failure the whole way through. And to see a situation like that, where this guy is carrying a blowtorch. He just came from an area where a fire was happening. The police detain him and then release him because they say they don't have probable cause. Then the ICE needs to step in. ICE, we now find out, might have to release him back into the public because California has these sanctuary state laws protecting illegal immigrants who broke the law to get here. It endangers everyone, and it literally endangers the illegal immigrants too. So while that's happening, to see Gavin Newsom then say, okay, well, now I'm going to spend $50 million, which is about 3 times what LA Fire Department's budget got cut by the way,
right,
on protecting illegal immigrants from getting deported. It's insane. And it's like, look, even let's take the best case, the Castile man. If you think that this is squarely a climate change thing, like it's just climate change, this is unavoidable. Do you look at the actions of Gavin Newsom and believe that he is best equipped to deal with climate change? Can you have any vote of confidence around the behaviors you've seen? So even if you agree that a lot of these, I would say far leftist politicians in California's far leftist politicians are right on the problems, I don't believe in their capacity to deliver solutions.
Hallelujah. Well said. What do you think the future looks like for California?
I can tell you what I hope it looks like, and then I can give you the pessimistic case. What I hope this is as tragic as it is a wake-up call for Californians, because Californians have been voting for these politicians who have been enacting these policies. And a lot of it has been based on superficial factors like race and identity and classism. And these politicians who just tell us what we want to hear, that yes, diversity is the most important thing. And yes, billionaires are evil and they are oppressing you, and I will save you from these evil rich people. And yes, we need to tax the rich and it's everyone else's fault except the politicians. I hope it's a wake-up call to be like, wait a second, these people just misdirect and deflect constantly. And it's time to wake up and stop voting radical left politicians into positions of authority where they don't deliver results and they make empty promises. That's what I hope happens, and it's a renaissance in LA. Because I love California, man. I think California represents the inspirational and aspirational spirit of American dream. Like, you have a lot of dreamers here, a lot of people who are here because they know you can have one connection with a person that changes your life. That's amazing. We have some of the most amazing nature in the world. And we also have the worst government in the United States. So I hope people wake up to the fact that this doesn't have to be happening. There are always going to be problems, but we can have the best problem solvers in place. Unfortunately, another possibility here is that people buy this nonsense from politicians who keep on misdirecting blame and say that this is just about climate change. And they say, yeah, it's just about climate change. Let me keep on voting these guys in because they are saying the sound bites that I like. And we're just going to keep on repeating this. I mean, we had another fire, Franklin fire, I think less than 2 months ago. Right? And we're just going to keep on going through the same cycle. So that's a possibility too. But I'm hoping now, because of the transparency that X has brought us, the work of independent journalists like you, and the fact that we had an election of Trump, which I think has made it more culturally acceptable to consider views that are more moderate or even right. And I think, I don't consider myself left or right, but I think the right is more aligned with the truth right now. And that changes. I think George W. Bush was a terrible president, and we'll have terrible Republican presidents, right, too. But I think we're having a correction more to the center. And I know me, I voted liberal Democrat my whole life. 2016, I voted for Hillary. 2020, I voted for Biden. And this last year, in 2024, I woke up. And I hope that many other people wake up too.
Well, your message has been resonating with millions of people. So keep doing what you're doing and spreading the truth. And I hope it is a wake-up call. I hope that for a lot of people, sometimes you have these tipping point moments for people, right? Maybe it happened 20 years ago for you. It happened a few years ago. Maybe for a lot of people, it's happening right now. So I think we're moving towards an awakening period in the United States. I'm really, really hopeful. I'm glad you're safe, Kaizen. Thank you so much for your message. I think it resonates with millions of people. So thank you, and keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
Wildfires in Los Angeles have caused an estimated $150 billion in damages. These devastating fires highlight California's ongoing struggle to control wildfires, despite several opportunities to strengthen its firefighting tools and resources. In this video, we will tell you how California over the past years snubbed help from Russia just to show support for Ukraine. LA wildfires have a lot to do with Russia-Ukraine war. Let's know more details. At the center of this controversy is the Russian BE-200, a specialized firefighting jet. The BE-200 is a unique amphibious jet designed for combating fires. It can carry up to 12,000 liters of water and has the ability to scoop water from lakes, seas, or oceans mid-flight. This makes it incredibly efficient for tackling large wildfires. The plane has a proven track record of success, having been used in countries like Russia, Israel, Spain, France, Turkey, and Indonesia. In Russia, it has been particularly effective in Siberia's Yakutia region, which frequently suffers from massive wildfires. In short, the BE-200 is a reliable, battle-tested firefighting aircraft. So what does the BE-200 have to do with California? There was a time when serious efforts were made to bring this advanced firefighting jet to the state. In fact, there were discussions about manufacturing the plane in Santa Maria, California. A letter from Russian Minister of Trade and Industry, Denis Manturov, to then California Governor Jerry Brown in 2017 outlined Russia's willingness to provide the state with the BE-200. By 2018, a California-based company called Seaplane Global Air Services announced it had signed a contract to purchase 10 BE-200 aircraft from Russia. This deal was seen as a significant step toward equipping California's firefighters with a powerful new tool to combat the state's increasingly destructive wildfires. There was even hope that this partnership would bring well-paying manufacturing jobs to California. However, despite the growing urgency to improve firefighting capabilities, no BE-200s have ever flown over Los Angeles to help extinguish flames. This raises an important question. Why did California pass up the chance to strengthen its firefighting arsenal with such an effective aircraft? The answer lies in the mix of politics, arrogance, and international sanctions. First, California politicians publicly dismissed the need for additional firefighting planes back in 2017, claiming the state had enough resources. In hindsight, this decision has aged poorly, as California continues to face some of the worst wildfires in its history. However, state officials were not the only ones responsible for blocking the BE-200s. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, or the FEMA, reportedly threatened to involve federal authorities if local officials pursued talks with Russia about acquiring the planes. This heavy-handed approach discouraged any meaningful progress on the deal. The final nail in the coffin came in the form of US sanctions against Russia. Following the beginning of the Ukraine war, all discussions about a potential partnership between California and Russian manufacturers came to an abrupt halt. Pages about the joint project disappeared from the websites, and it became clear that the deal was no longer viable. Sanctions made it politically and legally impossible for California to proceed with acquiring the BE-200, regardless of the state's dire need for better firefighting tools. In the end, the crisis reflects a larger issue. US political leaders appear more concerned with maintaining a hardline stance against Russia than addressing domestic crises like wildfires. They chose to prioritize sanctions and political optics over practical solutions that could save lives, protect properties, and bring jobs to California. The BE 200 saga illustrates how geopolitics can sometimes overshadow common sense. California had the opportunity to partner with Russia to acquire one of the best, most effective firefighting planes, but political barriers and international conflicts prevented it from happening. As a result, Los Angeles continues to burn and the damage grows worse every year.
The Russian troops' victorious offensive continues in all key directions of the front. Unfortunately for the Ukrainian army and NATO forces, the Russian army's assault units have achieved another major success on the battlefield over the past 24 hours. In particular, a few minutes ago, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation officially announced that the units of the group of troops under the designation center had liberated the settlement of Peskinoy, southwest of Pokrovsk. Commenting on the liberation of Peskinoy, war correspondents noted that the Ukrainian High Military Command had concentrated significant forces in this settlement. However, even despite this, the Ukrainian army units had to flee from Peskinoy under the onslaught of Russian troops. My dear truth seekers, let me remind you that the day before, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation also officially announced the liberation of the settlement of Shevchenko, south of Pokrovsk. Currently, units of the Russian army continue to increase the cover of the city of Pokrovsk from both the western and eastern sides. The Russian army is also continuing its successful offensive in Chasiv Yar direction of the front. In particular, war correspondents have reported that Russian troops have seized nearly all northern districts of Chasiv Yar, encompassing the refractory plant, a critical asset for the city's defense. At the same time, it is worth noting that this refractory plant was the most powerful fortified area of the Ukrainian army in Chasiv Yar. At the moment, in the remaining northern districts of the city, Russian troops are gradually displacing the Ukrainian army units from their positions in residential areas. It is reported that the Ukrainian High Military Command is desperately trying to rectify the situation by transferring reserves from Konstantinovka to Chasiv Yar. However, the Ukrainian soldiers and foreign mercenaries arriving in the city can no longer affect the course of hostilities. Moreover, on January 13, at 3 p.m. Moscow time, Russian sources reported that on the territory of the Novyi microdistrict and the Ognyaporets children's camp, Russian paratroopers managed to encircle a fairly large group of Ukrainian soldiers and foreign mercenaries. It is reported that these are mostly Polish, Italian, and Colombian citizens. The Ukrainian army and the so-called foreign mercenaries also continue to retreat rapidly in Toretsk direction of the front. In particular, on January 13, many Western think tanks, including experts from open source intelligence, admitted that the city of Toretsk was almost completely liberated by Russian troops. According to them, the northern outskirts of the city also came under the control of the Russian army. In particular, we are talking about the Famika microdistrict. At the same time, Western experts admit that the loss of the city of Toretsk will be a real disaster for the Ukrainian groups in Chasiv Yar and Konstantinovka. In general, reading the articles of Western analysts and watching interviews with Western experts, I noticed that even such Russophobic and biased analytical centers such as the Institute for the Study of War recognize the catastrophic situation of the Ukrainian army in all key directions of the front, including the Kursk region. Moreover, on January 12, Donald Trump's national security advisor Michael Waltz actually officially acknowledged Ukraine's defeat in this war. In particular, during an interview with American journalists, Michael Waltz officially stated that US President Donald Trump recognized that Ukraine would never be able to regain the lost territories. Moreover, this senior American official also stated that all Western leaders agreed with Donald Trump that it is impossible to take away from Russia former Ukrainian territories, even with the help of military force. Thus, Michael Waltz officially recognized the defeat of not only Kiev, but also the West in this confrontation with Moscow. This statement by Michael Waltz caused a real shock in Zelensky's office. In particular, insiders said that Volodymyr Zelensky's psychological state once again deteriorated sharply. It is reported that his personal psychiatrist is constantly with him to prevent another nervous breakdown of the head of the Kiev regime. At the same time, the Ukrainian Telegram channels also added fuel to the fire. In particular, they said that if the war ends without the return of the lost Ukrainian territories, Volodymyr Zelensky will have to explain for what hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers died. Especially considering that Volodymyr Zelensky could have ended this war back in 2022, when Putin invited him to recognize Crimea as Russian territory and refused to join NATO. However, after meeting with British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, Volodymyr Zelensky rejected all of Putin's proposals and decided to fight with Russia. As a result, Ukraine lost more than 1 million soldiers killed and wounded. In addition, Ukraine also lost Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson regions. At the same time, Ukraine's territorial losses rapidly gain momentum with each passing day. Military experts are confident that after the liberation of Pokrovsk, Russian troops will move the fighting to the territory of the Dnipropetrovsk region, and even liberate the city of Pavlograd by the summer of this year. On January 13, Deputy Head of the Security Council of the Russian Federation Dmitry Medvedev made a statement that also shocked the head of the Kiev regime. In particular, he said that after Russia rejected the Cyprus and Korean scenarios for solving the Ukrainian issue, the West offered Moscow to divide Ukraine according to the German scenario. At the same time, Dmitry Medvedev stressed that Moscow could agree to such a scenario, but only on condition that Kiev voluntarily gives Moscow all the remaining Russian-speaking regions. Thus, the deputy head of the Security Council of the Russian Federation once again made it clear to the Kiev regime and its masters in the West that this war would end only when the West and its puppets in Kiev accepted all of Moscow's conditions and voluntarily give Putin historically Russian lands. Otherwise, a state like Ukraine will simply cease to exist.
within his coalition are very critical and think the U.S. Should do everything it can to bring that conflict to a close. So, and obviously many are very opposed to that in Congress as well. So one of the issues that I think is the most discussed and the most talked about in terms of what may or may not happen and what is happening there on the ground and what the reality really sets forth for us. So we are very, very honored to be joined here on the show by Glenn Deason, who's a professor at the University of Southeastern Norway and also the author of a book I've been digging into lately, The Ukraine War and the Eurasian World Order. Mr. Deason, thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me on.
Well, great to have you here with us. Earlier today, I saw that Mr. Keith Kellogg, General Keith Kellogg, who is going to be Trump's special envoy for Ukraine, has said that he's setting for himself a 100-day timeline starting on January 20th to end the war in Ukraine, that he's going to try to find a way to wind it down somehow, some way. How realistic does that seem to you? I mean, obviously, the war situation is not going well for Ukraine, but it does seem that there's quite a bit of resistance on the Ukrainian side to what to many seem, I think, like the most realistic options for a deal.
At least, extending it from 24 hours to ending the war to 100 days, it does seem more realistic, but it is a challenge. And again, I don't doubt that Trump genuinely wants to end the war. I think he sees it as too expensive. It can't be won. And probably more importantly for him, it's also pushing Russia and China closer together, which is creating other consequences such as de-dollarization, decoupling from the U.S. in supply chains, a lot of things which is very bad for the United States' relative power in the world. So I think he wants to end this, but again, I'm a bit skeptical because it's what the Russians want now is a big ask, because they demand the core demand they had, which was initially agreed 3 years ago in Istanbul, was that Ukraine would restore its neutrality. There is no more NATO expansion. But that was the Istanbul agreement. Now, of course, after 3 years of war, there's also territorial concessions. So that's why it's referred to as Istanbul Plus. That is, restoring neutrality plus territorial concessions. So it's very difficult for Trump to deliver on this, given that he's the big deal maker. So I'm a bit skeptical to what extent it's possible to end this war. But you mentioned the Ukraine having some resistance. I think it's mostly from Zelensky. Again, if you look at the polling across Ukraine, there's not a single oblast left in Ukraine where they actually have a majority for wanting to continue the war. In the last poll I saw, only 16% support Zelensky, so they don't want this war. But again, Zelensky does. But again, the only reason why the war continues is because the US and the lesser extent some Europeans keep supporting it. So if Trump pulls the plug, the war is over. It doesn't really matter what Zelensky thinks.
That's really interesting. You mentioned a poll number like that when Zelensky, is always trotted out as being this like real Democrat, like democratically beloved leader. But, I'm curious when it comes to the issue of Ukraine and, whatever it is that Trump might want to do or not want to do, what is the ongoing impact on Europe? And moreover, has this war been in Europe's interest? I mean, I know the answer to that, but obviously, the people in charge of European policy tend to be in that Atlanticist camp. But yeah, I'm just curious, what has been the impact on Europe? And is there perhaps a shift in Europe when it comes to how they feel about going on with this war?
Well, first, just let me say with Zelensky, he did win on a democratic platform, but also on a peace platform. He won in 2019. He got a landslide victory with 73% of the votes. But this was on the basis of ending the war, so negotiating with Donbass, making peace with Russia, and implementing the Minsk agreement. He was then pressured by various non-governmental organizations and extreme right-wing forces, which the US and other European countries had allied themselves with. So after this, he became less and less popular. And when Medvedchuk, the main opposition, became more popular than him, he threw him in jail and later stripped him of his Ukrainian citizenship. So not so much democratic anymore, as he has canceled all opposition parties and subordinated the media to himself. But But in terms of Europe, I don't think anyone in Europe would anymore consider this to be in their interest. Again, if you go back to 2008, when NATO membership was promised to Ukraine, at least future membership, the Europeans knew that this would cause war. Merkel referred to it at that time as Moscow would interpret it as a declaration of war. So they were hesitant for a long time. But now things are kind of strange because it looks like the Americans are pulling a bit back. Meanwhile, the Europeans are really very fearful that peace might break out. So they are very committed to this. Initially, they weren't this. But they assumed that Russia could be defeated on the battlefield. Its economy would collapse if enough sanctions would be pushed on it, and also the international community would isolate Russia. None of the above has happened. The Russian economy is growing. It's now the fourth largest in the world, according to the World Bank. They're defeating NATO's army, which is built, the Ukrainian army, which NATO has built, and while the West isolates Russia, it's been embraced by the rest of the world. It's been leading BRICS now, so it's I think it's gone very bad for Europe. And as the former German finance minister recognized a few days ago, the sanctions have been beneficial for US, but they've been very harmful for Europe. So we're seeing now European industries deindustrializing, and it's not as if our political leaders are going to change their mind, but if you continue to stare the continent off a cliff, then after a while alternatives will come along. And we already see that the British the British government is on shaky grounds. The French, Macron is clinging on to power even after losing the election. The Germans are considering banning the main opposition party, which is AfD. Austria's just brought in a new party now, who will form a government, and they are opposed to sending more weapons to Ukraine. They want to make peace with Russia. You see Slovakia, Hungary suggesting the same. Italy doesn't want to send more weapons. So the mood is definitely shifting. We lost the war. That is, NATO lost the war. And slowly we'll come to terms with this. But there seems to be concerns about Trump pushing this peace and ending the war.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting reality when peace seems to be something that many people feel is the more dangerous option in the ruling circles in many countries. But, it's an interesting, I think, commentary, the point you were making about what people were considering would happen to Russia, that it would collapse, that all these different, negative impacts would happen. I mean, what do you think that says about and we talk a lot about the multipolar world. You, of course, have the new book, The Ukraine War and the Eurasian World Order, which is discussing this quite a bit. I mean, not that the U.S. is not extremely powerful, not that the West can't do many things, not that they have not been able to carry out a proxy war that undoubtedly has harmed Russia, even though if it hasn't collapsed it. But does this say something about the era of unipolarity, that despite what seems like the will to crush Russia, the West has not been able to do so?
Yeah, no, it suggests that unipolarity is over. And this is why I also refer to this war as being about world order, because keep in mind that the NATO expansion, it came at expense of agreements we had for an inclusive pan-European security architecture. So this was all abandoned. So NATO expansion was all about instead constructing a European security order based on collective hegemony. That is a Europe which Russia wouldn't belong to, which unavoidably becomes a Europe against Russia. And this is why at least me, I've been warning for the past 20 years that this would take us towards war, which it has. But again, unipolarity was always going to be a temporary phenomenon, because it's premised on the idea that you have to keep down all other rising powers emerging at the periphery. So the reason why I think it's also damaging for the United States is after a while it will exhaust its resources, it will go further down in debt, it will cause social problems, political divisions. And while it's exhausting its resources, which is transferred from the core to the periphery, you see then the rivals beginning to collectively balance the United States. And not just rivals of America, but you also see friends and allies. So Turkey, India, they're all joining in on reducing reliance on the dollar, American technologies, industries, transportation corridors, its banks, simply because they're afraid of secondary sanctions. And they see that the administrative power the US, as well as lesser extent the Europeans, have had over the international economy is being weaponized to prevent the rise of rivals. And this is something everyone wants to overcome, which is why there's been such a demand for BRICS. So I don't think it's good for the US. It's not good for the world. I think everyone would have benefited from from the United States, which have probably take a more modest role. So, but again, the main thought behind this, the Ukraine war, as many leaders, political leaders have said, is if you can knock out the Russians, then we can focus our resources on countering the Chinese. But instead, we see that the opposite has happened. A new alternative economic infrastructure has emerged. A lot of these countries have gotten closer together, and yeah, we didn't achieve any of it. And now, instead of knocking out Russia and restoring the unipolar order, we see that it's only intensifying the speed in which we're transitioning away from unipolarity and towards multipolarity.
So, Glenn, I'm curious, as we await this new Trump administration to come into office, what are the potential outcomes we could see, or the potential paths for the war in Ukraine? Obviously, you can't predict exactly what's going to happen, but in terms of like forecasting, what can we maybe expect to see one way or another, if you had to, I don't know, estimate what's the most likely outcome? I'll put it that way.
Well, I would assume that, he wants to have a good deal, something that makes the United States also in a good position, and is not seen as simply selling out to Ukraine to the Russians. So I'm assuming that he won't necessarily end the war right away. Indeed, if you cut off the Ukrainians completely, then you don't have much bargaining power when you sit down to negotiate with the Russians. But I think it's going to try to push more of the responsibility, that is the weapons and the finance, over to the Europeans. Effectively said, this is your mess. America has more important priorities, so primarily pivoting to Asia. So I think this is where it's going. I think the Ukrainian army is disintegrating faster by the day. Things are really going poorly, but I'm not sure how much you can. My great concern is that he's not going to be able to negotiate a peace simply because it might be based on the wrong premises. I mean, for so long, both the Americans and Europeans have been talking about the stagnant front lines, and it's a stalemate. But this is not correct. It's a war of attrition in which you bleed adversaries dry before you take territory. We seem to measure everything in territory over here. But the Ukrainian army is collapsing. Once it's collapsing now, you see territories shifting increasingly fast. In the old days, 2 years ago, the Russians had to essentially bomb every single building to the ground before they could take a city. Now they're moving into fortified lines, which are unmanned effectively. So things are falling apart very fast. You're having huge desertions in Ukraine. More larger groups of Ukrainians are being surrounded in these cauldrons. The weapons are falling apart, communication is breaking down, morale is dropping. So things are quite horrible. And I guess this is also a negative thing. If you're going to make a peace deal, there's no way Ukraine can get out of this well. And for a country that has suffered so much, lost hundreds of thousands of men and its territory, it's going to be very hard to sell the horrible deal, which we'll end up with now.
Well, a lot to not look forward to, but a lot to be seen, I guess, as we have the incoming administration here, and even the final days of the Biden administration and others. Glenn Deason, professor at University of Southeastern Norway and author of the book, The Ukraine War and the Eurasian World Order.
th, 2025. But first, this.
We're taught to work hard for 35 to
prisoners of war. Do you know if this is true and where they were fighting, and if there's any geopolitical significance to this?
Well, what I can say is
you're competing with Maverick.
The timing is everything, but hopefully they'll stop since the truck drove by. It appears that these two people aren't North Koreans. They're from Tuvan, which is a region of Russia that has Asiatic population. The Ukrainians are trying to turn the North Korean issue, manufacturing North Korean issue, in order to create the perception that Russia can't win this war on its own and is bringing in outside forces to assist it. And the Ukrainians say, hey, look, if it's good for the goose, it's got to be good for the gander. If Russia can bring in these North Koreans, then certainly we can bring in the Europeans. That's what it's all about. And so there's both the Ukrainians and the United States and Europe have been playing this up. Just to show you the absurdity of much of the Ukrainian claims, if you know anything about Russia, Russia doesn't do anything without solid legal agreements in place. The Ukrainians and NATO and the United States were already committed to tens of thousands of North Korean soldiers fighting in Kursk before Russia ratified its strategic military agreement with North Korea that could have opened the door for North Korean troops to come into Russia. There's no doubt in my mind that some North Korean units are in Russia. Artillery units appear to be engaged, and it also looks as though North Korea sent cadre elements in to attach themselves to Russian formations at certain levels so that their officers can learn about modern warfare with the possibility that once the officers become attuned to the Russian way of fighting a war, etc., that they can bring in North Korean troops who will have received training based upon what these officers have sent back. The idea that Russia would allow North Korea to send in thousands of troops without any sort of integration training, familiarization training, just throw them into combat is absurd in the extreme. So I discount this propaganda effort by the Ukrainians, and I think most people who have looked at this have said that these are basically soldiers from Tuvan. They're not North Korean.
Why would Russia even want or need North Koreans or any other nation's military assisting it at this stage of the special military operation when they're so close to achieving their goals?
According to, again, news reports based upon U.S. intelligence, this isn't about Russia saying we need help. The exact opposite. It's about North Korea saying, hey, look, we're getting ready to hook and jab with America and South Korea on the peninsula, and we need to get combat hardened troops. We need to learn about war up front, and we want to come in and observe and attach. And that's why I think that most of the North Korean presence that's going to take place, and it's going to take place exclusively on Russian soil. Notice that this is in Kursk, not in the Donbass and contested regions, so that the Russians never be accused of sending North Korean troops to help with the fight in the Donbass. This is about Russian territory exclusive. But the North Koreans have made a case that they need to get combat experience, that they need to learn these lessons of war quickly, that this can't be an academic exercise. And so I believe they are attaching, like I said, cadre forces to the Russian headquarters, down to perhaps the battalion level. They might even have some people going down to the company level to look at tactics, look at how drones are used, look at fire, call for fires, and that they probably have brought in some artillery units that will then attach themselves to larger Russian artillery formations to learn about, call for fires, doing direct support artillery missions, general support artillery missions, how to do a call for fire, how to, in the modern day and age, how to use drones, to send drones out to do the reconnaissance, to adjust fires off drones, all the various techniques, which many of which have been invented in this war, haven't yet been turned into a course of study at Russian academies. And the best way to learn this is to go straight to the front lines. It's something, the United States and everybody has done. Whenever there's a war someplace that we're not involved in, we send military liaison people there to learn, to observe, that we attach them. We fought in a number of British-only affairs back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and where we've attached our troops there, and the British have attached their officers to our units too. And they've participated in combat operations where the United Kingdom isn't a participant. It's how you learn, especially if you're allies. And so there's no doubt in my mind that North Korea and Russia have signed a strategic agreement that allows North Korea to send formations in, primarily in the combat support area, as opposed to frontline infantry, frontline armor, but fire support, and then to get cadre observers attached down to battalion, maybe down to company level in certain areas.
Are you surprised that the Ukrainians have not been expelled from Kursk, that they're still there?
Surprised? No, I mean, not if you, again, I can't put my Marine Corps hat on it, because if this was the Marine Corps mission, we'd have rooted them out and killed every single one of those son of a guns already, but we would have taken casualties. But we're not casualty averse. We're mission focused, and when we're told to close with and destroy the enemy through firepower maneuver, that's what we will do.
Well, are the Russians casualty averse?
Yeah, of course they are. The Russians aren't in the business of sacrificing their troops needlessly. They have a strategic objective which they are focused on achieving, demilitarizing the Ukrainians, not the Russians. It's not the Russians' job to go out there and do all this nonsense you hear about human wave tactics, and it's just wrong. It's a lie. The Russians are suffering casualties because the Ukrainians are defending hard. The Ukrainians are willing to dig in and die, and it takes time to dig them out. But you could be more aggressive and take these people out, but you would lose more men, more equipment, and that's not what the Russians do. Putin has said on a number of occasions that we're not willing to put the pedal to the metal to achieve a more rapid victory.
Are the Ukrainian and whoever else is with them troops in Kursk completely surrounded so that their supply lines from Ukraine are cut off?
No, they're still receiving supplies through Ukraine. It's difficult. The Russians have their own drones and their own fire support. They've identified the lines of community, but the Ukrainians are able to push through. Look, the Ukrainians have made very effective use of drone warfare. And what the Ukrainians do when they want to make a movement is they flood the zone with drones. And so the Russians are in, basically hide mode for a period of time. And during that period of time, the Ukrainians are shoving forces in. And then the Russians, beat back the drones, and then the Russians attack. But this is warfare. Again, there's not a single West Point graduate out there that understands anything about what's happening in Ukraine today, because they were trained to fight a completely different kind of warfare. If they were put in charge of forces right now, they would be overwhelmed by the chaos of what's happening there, because it's a whole different approach of combat. The Russians have mastered it, but so have the Ukrainians. And the Ukrainians, while they're losing, it doesn't mean that that nothing goes their way. There are good days for the Ukrainians. There are good moments for the Ukrainians, but overall, they're getting beat, and the Russians know this. This is a war of attrition. And the concept of a war of attrition is to kill more of them than they kill of you. So the Russians aren't in any hurry to die. They will die. They have taken casualties, but they are in a very methodical manner pushing the Ukrainians back piece by piece by piece. And when the Ukrainians say, we're here to fight and die, the Russians say, thank you. We'll help kill you. It may take some time, but then we'll keep on moving until you've decided enough dying and you start retreating. The Russians have total command of the situation right now, but they aren't driven by a clock. You see, here in the West, everything's tick tock, tick tock, tick tock. We got to do it by this date, by this time. Well, we've attached political objectives to calendar dates. The Russians haven't done that. They simply have political objectives. Demilitarization, that means to kill every Ukrainian out there or cause them to surrender or to capture them. They're not capturing mercenaries right now. I thought that was a very telling admission by the Russians, that if you're a mercenary, you're caught on Russian soil as opposed to in the contested areas of the Donbass. If you're caught in Kursk and you're a mercenary, you die. That's it. They execute you on the spot. You don't have any rights. You're just scum to them, and they hate you and they will kill you.
Well, there's no Geneva Convention protection for them.
That's correct.
Right. Okay. Jake Sullivan, not one of our favorite people, has been making a farewell tour over the weekend. I want to play a clip. This will aggravate you a little bit, but I'd love your comments on it. claiming that because of Joe Biden, the U.S. is stronger, Russia is weaker, and NATO is in better shape. It's like he's in another world, Scott, but I'll let you listen to it and solicit your comment. Chris, cut number one.
Where across the globe could you point and say the United States is safer because of what we did here?
Well, I'd start by saying our alliances are stronger than we found them 4 years ago. They're stronger than they've been in decades. NATO is more powerful, purposeful, and bigger. Our alliances in the Asia Pacific are at all-time highs. And our adversaries and competitors are weaker across the board. Russia's weaker, Iran's weaker, China is weaker. And all the while, we kept America out of war. So I think the American people are safer and the country is better off than we were 4 years ago. And we're handing all that off to the next team, as well as having the engines of American power humming, our economy, our technology, our defense industrial base, our supply chains. So the United States is in a stronger, more secure position, and our competitors and adversaries are weaker and under pressure. I think that's the main handoff that we will make.
China's weaker, Iran's weaker, Russia's weaker. What is he talking about?
It's just nonsense, 100% nonsense, and he knows it. The shame here isn't that Sullivan's saying this. You expect him to say that. He's the national security advisor to the president. His job is to politicize everything, to make sure that the national security is subordinated to the political objectives of the president of the United States. So he's going to lie, cheat, steal, spin, do what he does. You know, the problem is Jake Tapper. Where's the pushback? Where's the challenge? I mean, Mark Rutte, the Secretary General, just said if NATO doesn't get its act together in 3 to 5 years, all of Europe's going to have to learn to speak Russian. How does that sound like you're doing, Jake? If the Secretary General of NATO says we're so screwed because of how badly we're doing that if we don't fix it in 3 to 5 years, we have to speak Russian, that's a gross exaggeration. Russia's not moving in on Europe, but that's a mindset there. That doesn't sound like a NATO that's stronger than it's ever been. Gosh, Jake, didn't the Danish Prime Minister come out and say that if the United States moves in on Greenland as Trump will be president, Jake, you forget that, you're done on January 20th. Trump comes in Denmark saying that would be an invasion of NATO territory. We may have to go to NATO for Article 5. Why is a NATO member threatening to put Article 5 against the United States if we're so damn close and unified? NATO is falling apart. Did you not see the elections that just took place in the Czech Republic? A president now is dead set against this war in Ukraine, dead set against sending military equipment. Romania just had a presidential election overturned illegally because they elected a president who said the same thing. Hungary and Slovakia are out. Germany is about to elect a new government, the AfD, that's out of the EU and maybe out of NATO. He doesn't know what he's talking about. NATO is a fundamentally broken institution that can't afford to continue and will collapse within 5 years. That's the NATO that Jake Sullivan's turning over to Donald Trump. And then we can go on and on and on. There's not a single point in the globe today where America's doing better than we were before. I'll tell you what, Jake, when you came in, Iran wasn't 3 days away from having a nuclear bomb. But because of you, Jake, you're the national security advisor. It's your responsibility. They are on the cusp of having it if a political decision is made. How did we get to this point, Jake? How do we get to the point where Iran has ballistic missiles that are threatening Israel and Israel can't do anything to defend it because your Iron Dome that you worked with Israel didn't work? Syria fell, but is it what you wanted, Jake? Did you really want Al-Qaeda to take over? Have you thought about the consequences? Or are you just brain dead like everybody else in the national security establishment? You don't know what to do about Turkey now, do you, Jake? And I think, Jake, you had some conversations. We talked about maybe we have to expel Turkey from NATO. How does that make NATO look, Jake? Strong? And gosh, Asian alliances? Indonesia just joined BRICS. Malaysia and Thailand are following, and the Philippines are saying, the hell with America, we're going that way too. South Korea, this bastion of democracy, is getting ready to impeach and arrest their president for illegally calling for martial law. How's democracy looking in South Korea? And Japan's just a basket case of a nation. What happens when Trump comes in and that little tripartite alliance that you made collapses? Because it's going to collapse, Jake, because nothing you did in the Biden administration is made out of bricks and mortar. Everything you did is made out of straw, and the big bad wolf's going to come in and huff and puff and blow it all down. That's the reality of Jake Sullivan's world. But Jake Tapper didn't have the journalistic integrity to even push back a little bit.
Boy, how I wish one of the two Jakes I'm not sure which one I prefer, had been here to attempt to respond to you. That was passionate, articulate, and of course, right on the mark. What happens if President Trump pulls us out of NATO? That would really be the death knell to it, wouldn't it?
NATO's already fatally wounded. NATO can't survive. Just to give you an example, at a minimum, Trump's going to say, we can't continue to subsidize you. You need to get your spending up 5% across the board. There's hardly any NATO countries that can do that in a sustained fashion. Germany won't. When Germany would, if AFD wins this round, and right now the latest poll shows AFD in the lead.
You're talking about the
alternative for
conservative traditionalist political party, once outlawed, now on the cusp of winning in Germany.
In Germany. And if they do that, they've said the first thing they're going to do is get out of the European Union. The European Union is the political front of this military alliance called NATO. If European Union collapses, NATO collapses immediately thereafter. But even if the European Union survives, NATO can't afford to survive. Let's take Germany again, the heart of NATO. Their German military, when this conflict in Ukraine started, asked for 100 billion euros to go in and rebuild the German military. Last year, the military went to the parliament and said, hey, we're out of that money, and nothing happened really, because you can't. It's like investing into a house that's totally worn down. It's just a money pit. You're throwing money, and nothing gets done because I found everything. It's easier to tear it down. But no, Germany's trying to rebuild a military where 2/3 of their air force is hangar queens because they haven't maintained them. They can't get them off the ground. They never will get them off the ground. Same thing with their army in the barracks. They haven't maintained it, haven't built new equipment in sufficient numbers. Troops are poorly trained. So they want to change things. So Pistorius, the defense minister, went to the parliament and said, I need about a 8 to 9% increase in the budget. Parliament went back and said, we don't have that money. Our economy is collapsing, by the way, thanks to your government. So we're going to give you about 1.6%. We can check these numbers. I'm right, or roughly right, but I might be off by a couple decimal points each way. But the point is, that's below inflation. So the German military, instead of expanding, is shrinking. Shrinking, Judge. As we speak, it's shrinking because the budget increase didn't keep up with inflation, which means they can't afford the military they have. They have to cut back to pay, and it's going to be that way going forward. Every military is that way. The British military is almost non-existent. The French military, non-functional. And now Trump's going to say, hey, you got to go up to 5%. And if you don't, we're out. And we may be out anyways. NATO's dead. I don't think it survives Trump's first term. I think it's a finished, complete organization. And it's time. It's outlived its utility. It was viable during the Cold War, but when the Soviet Union collapsed, NATO had no mission. Then it went in search of a mission, and it has turned into an offensive instrument of power. It's bombed. I mean, I love it when NATO says Russia's bombing a European capital when they hit Kiev. Well, NATO, you bombed Belgrade in Serbia back in 1999. You started the trend. And then you went and did regime change in Libya. And then you went and helped justify the invasion and regime change in Afghanistan, got involved in a 20-year experiment in nation building, and got the plug pulled on you by the United States, who doesn't give a damn about you to begin with, leaving you high and dry. You had to leave. You were humiliated. And now you've overinvested yourself politically, economically into Ukraine, not a losing conflict, a lost conflict. NATO won't survive.
Scott, you're on fire, my man. How do you interpret President Trump's posting on Truth Social, the lambasting that our friend and colleague, Professor Jeff Sachs, gave to Benjamin Netanyahu?
Look, Trump's always been complicated on this issue. He is, straight up supporter of Israel, but he doesn't have good, strong relations with Netanyahu. And I think Trump recognizes, as Jeffrey Sachs does, that Israel is behind every major war in the Middle East, and Israel has sought to drag America into every major war, the very wars that Trump doesn't want to be a part of. And he understands what Israel's trying to do with Iran and get America dragged into that conflict. And while a Trump administration, especially given the appointments that he's put into his cabinet, very pro-Zionist, pro-Israeli appointments, isn't going to turn its back on Israel, he's not going to be the rubber stamp for Benjamin Netanyahu. And I think by reposting this, he's saying that's the thought that I concur with. That's my thinking. And look what Netanyahu's done. He's not coming to the inauguration. So it's going to be interesting going forward. I think Trump's going to say, we're here to help Israel, but not on Netanyahu's terms.
Should Trump trust Netanyahu?
Trump doesn't trust Netanyahu. It's not should he trust. He just flat out doesn't trust Netanyahu. He knows that Netanyahu is a lying, whatever.
Well, Scotty, thank you very much, my dear friend. Much appreciated.
In 1 second.
$11.46.20.
Routinely described as the most powerful force in the Middle East. And but it really is pretty remarkable if you think about it, that they, are confined to an area that's about 25 miles long from north to south and 5 miles wide east to west, maybe 10 miles wide east to west, but it's not a big area. And they didn't have artillery. They didn't have air defense. They didn't have any kind of fixed wing or aircraft or attack helicopters to use. They certainly didn't have any armor, no tanks. And despite all of that, they've gone up against the Israeli army, who is, routinely described as the most powerful force in the Middle East. Well, if that's the most powerful force in the Middle East, what they have succeeded in doing after 14 months of war, going on 15 months now, they've killed almost 50,000 men, women, and children. Israel claims that 16 to 20,000 of those are Hamas fighters. I don't believe that at all.
They kill way more than that.
But Hamas continues fighting, and they continue resisting. And they've, just the other day, they killed 4 more Israeli soldiers. And that's the problem for Israel. It doesn't have an unlimited supply of men that they can just throw into what has turned out to be a little bit of a meat grinder for Israel. Now, it's been a terrible price paid by the Palestinian people that occupy that are in Gaza. I think upward of 80% of the structures in that area have been destroyed, mosques destroyed, major infrastructure destroyed. They've tried to make it an uninhabitable place for the Palestinian people, and yet they continue to fight. Now, we're getting news today that there's been a breakthrough in negotiations on a ceasefire and a hostage release. And I thought we got sort of a hint of that last week when Donald Trump said, went out and very bombastically stated that if these hostages weren't released by the 20th of January, there'd be hell to pay. Well, the Palestinians have already paid the price of 4 hells. So, one more is not going to make any difference. But that told me that actually, I think there was progress on the negotiation front, because Trump is positioning himself to take credit for it. And maybe he does deserve credit for it, because I think we need to look at that. I'm choosing to post on Truth Social Jeffrey Sachs' excellent commentary on the despicable nature of Benjamin Netanyahu. So I don't view these things in isolation. I think we have to take it as a whole, that there is some movement, and that you're going to see the remaining hostages that Hamas took released in exchange for a release of 1,000 or 2,000 Palestinian hostages that Israel has taken.
Why shouldn't we accept uncritically the numbers given out by the IDF?
Which numbers would those be?
Well, the numbers of where they said that 16,000 of the slaughtered Gazans were Hamas fighters, and you said you didn't believe the number.
Yeah, they're not wearing uniforms. They're not carrying badges. They don't, and the Israelis certainly aren't going in there collecting the bodies and counting them up. So this is more reminiscent of body counts in Vietnam. Oh man, we killed 100 of them. How do you know? Well, we just took an area and did some math computations. They have no way of knowing. That's the in fact, what some of the reports indicate is that Hamas, they've lost fighters. There have been fighters that have been killed, but the only way you can tell that is if they've been out in the open carrying a firearm. But they're also growing in strength. More and more of the Hamas did not necessarily prior to the start of October 7th enjoy widespread support, but the Israeli actions against the Palestinian people have solidified that support for Hamas, and is bringing, there are 16, 17-year-old boys that are joining up to fight because they've seen their mothers, their sisters, their fathers, their brothers killed. Who wouldn't want revenge in the face of something like that?
Is Hamas continuing to resist the IDF militarily inside Gaza?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I said they've lured. There were reports the other day that they had wired a tunnel, and the Israelis entered it, and they blew it up. The Hamas blew it up, and it killed 7 Israelis and wounded a number of others. So Israel's continuing to suffer casualties, which, I believe is one of the motivations, at least maybe not from Netanyahu's part, but certainly from the standpoint of the Israeli Defense Force, that they need to stop the bleeding. They recognize they don't have unlimited resources. They are largely a reserve army. That means they're dependent upon reservists who work regular jobs and then will go take off from those jobs to serve in the military. That's okay for a month or two. After 14, 15 months, boy, that gets to be a drag. It puts a strain on the families. It puts a strain on the businesses. And then you get the emotional strain, because what these Israeli soldiers are doing is they're murdering civilians. And while there may be a few psychopaths on the side of the Israelis, men without any kind of moral conscience at all, what we're seeing is there's actual evidence that some of these soldiers, when they are haunted by the reality that they have murdered unarmed children and women and unarmed civilian men, and then that lingers with them, and you've had a number of increased number of psychiatric cases as well as suicides. So any general worth their salt is going to recognize we can't continue to put our soldiers into situations where they're going to dehumanize themselves, because it doesn't make for a strong army.
How many Palestinians are still living in Gaza?
I think close to 1 million. They don't have anywhere to go. That's the problem. They're being driven from point to point. Sort of tongue in cheek. They could write a book on survival that would rival anything out there. How to survive, how to feed your family. And this is in wintertime now. We've seen some of these horrific images of children that have been frozen to death, little babies, simply because there is no heat to keep them warm. And yet they continue, they go on.
Here's a comment by Steve Witkoff. Now, Mr. Witkoff is a real estate developer, but has been chosen by President-elect Trump to be his Middle East envoy. I guess this is to replace Amos Hochstein.
Yeah.
But here he is last week on Fox News, cut number 3.
I think they're going well, but I would also tell you that it's the president's strong stance, his certitude in asserting that all hell will break loose, that is moving people. I lost a son, I lost a child, and so these parents think about this every single night when they go to sleep. We have to get them home. It's the American hostages. It's all the hostages. And by the way, there'll be plenty of Palestinians who will be released as a result of this, and they'll go home to their families. So I think this is something that the world needs to see. We need this moment.
Mr. Witkoff forgot that they won't have homes to go back to because they've been destroyed by the IDF. 2,000-pound bombs and everything else.
Well, actually, a lot of what he's, a lot of the Palestinians that are going to be released have been picked up in the West Bank. So and while the Israeli settlers have been destroying those homes in the West Bank, they still do have some territory.
Oh, these are not necessarily Gazans.
Correct. Now, what's interesting is it is reported that Witkoff, even though he is in an incoming administration, is actually participating now in Qatar with the Biden representatives in negotiating with Hamas and with Israelis. So, that's pretty remarkable. All of this nonsense about, there's going to be hell to pay. Judge, when I moved from CIA down to State Department and started in 1st of November 1989, one of the main issues we were focused on at the time were the hostages that were being held in Lebanon. We had several U.S. hostages and European hostages that were being held by a variety of groups, including Hezbollah and Amal. And good Lord, it was a priority to find them. Remember that was the Iran-Contra had its roots in Reagan trying to cut a deal using Ollie North to get those hostages out. And we had all intelligence assets dedicated to it. We had, Delta Force standing by. There was a top secret U.S. Army unit. It's at the time was known as ISA, and they had personnel on the ground in Lebanon. One of them he's a friend of mine. He was a Japanese American. He was running around disguised as a Japanese tourist, snapping photographs, looking for these people. And we could never find them. We could have blown up all of Beirut. It wouldn't have brought the hostages out. The same. And so this Trump, there'll be hell to pay. I know that's their talking point. Well, I think all they're doing is positioning themselves so that when the deal is made, Trump will get to say, take a victory lap. And
Right.
maybe rightly so.
Right. You almost can't blame him, and he'll argue that he put public pressure on both sides to come to an agreement.
Well, and in fact, you've played Jeffrey Sachs' interview with I think the Cambridge Student Union, and that message. Do you think that was just simply an isolated fact? No, that was as I mentioned earlier. This is all you have to take it all as comprehensive.
Why do you think the president did that 5 days after he said, "I'm Israel's best friend"? He didn't say I'm Netanyahu's best friend. He said I'm Israel's best friend.
Sending a clear message to Netanyahu, as Jeffrey Sachs, his colorful description of Netanyahu as a person of, let's call it, questionable parentage.
Yes.
So, that was intended to send a message to Netanyahu. Hey, Trump is not necessarily, he's not they don't have a bromance going on. He remembers that Netanyahu couldn't wait to welcome Joe Biden in as the successor to Donald Trump. Trump, Trump's got a memory like an elephant on that stuff.
Should Trump trust? Should any American president trust Netanyahu?
Oh, heavens no. Netanyahu's wife shouldn't trust Netanyahu. I mean, he is one of the most conniving, immoral leaders that we've ever seen. He has no regard for the interests of the Israeli people and completely inhuman when it comes to dealing with Palestinians.
Are Israel and Iran preparing for war with each other as we speak?
Well, Iran has just completed a series of military exercises that included demonstrating air defense systems and the integrated and how those their military units would respond to an attack. Israel's not conducted similar exercises. They can't. They're too caught up with the daily grind of war. We'll know the next 8 days are probably, or 7 days, because a week from today, Donald Trump will be inaugurated. This is, I think, Israel's last chance to try to start a war with Iran. I think the very last thing Donald Trump wants is to start office with a new war in the Middle East. He's going to negotiate. He's going to talk. He's going to find a way to do this nonviolently, because I think he knows that if he does get bogged down in war, it will destroy his presidency. And I think he's looking at a legacy of to be known as the man who brought peace. And if he can generally bring about a reconciliation and peace between Israel and Iran, good Lord, that would be a miracle.
Yeah, it sure would. Does Iran have a nuclear weapon?
I think they've got the capacity to build one. I don't know if they have now made that final decision to cross that Rubicon. I would not surprise me if they did that in the wake of some of the recent, Israel's attacks into Syria and the fall of of Bashar al-Assad. And at that point, that Iran recognizes, you know what? Countries that don't have a nuke get invaded. Countries that don't have a nuke get toppled. Maybe we need to have a nuke to buy some insurance. That kind of thinking wouldn't surprise me. But they have also had, previous to this, the religious fatwa prescribing it, prohibiting it. That they saw that as, if you will, an affront to Islam, and they, took the religion seriously.
Yeah. And why is it that the U.S. and its allies accept Israel's nuclear weapon, the technology for which was stolen from the United States, the authorizations for which were never sought and thus never granted, but not Iran's?
Yeah, well, we've had that fact's been on the table for 65 years. It's like that movie Fight Club. We don't talk about the first rule of Fight Club. Don't talk about Fight Club. The first rule of Israeli nuclear force: don't talk about Israeli nuclear force. Don't admit it. But all concede that it's there. So it's there as a capability that, could be used as a form of suicide, because there is no real way that Israel could use that tactically or strategically that would enhance and secure Israel's safety. It would, in fact, have just the opposite effect, and it would bring other countries involved. So today is the 13th. We're 4 days away from Russia and Iran signing a new comprehensive security agreement that will encompass economic, political, as well as military dimensions. Then you have, Russia and China will be conducting joint naval military exercises, and I think the next 3 months, with Iran. So Iran's not isolated, even though, the West likes to pretend, oh yeah, we're isolating them, we're hitting them hard with sanctions. But Iran is starting to dig itself out of that. And its current leader, Pezeshkian, the president, has been, they're talking behind the scenes. And I'm sure there have been some approaches made to Trump about negotiations. I think Trump, given the opportunity, will negotiate with Iran as opposed to go to war with Iran. And that, that's put Netanyahu off course. But I think that's one of the reasons Trump sent that message via Jeffrey Sachs.
Yeah.
Sachs was the message bearer to Netanyahu. This is what I really think of you. I will, in fact, you could make the case that Trump recognizes that if Netanyahu and his crazies on the religious right are allowed to pursue the course of action that they're pursuing, it will culminate in the destruction of Israel. And Trump actually, I think Trump genuinely loves the Israelis, but he recognizes, I think, as well, that what they're doing now is self-destructive, and it will cause Israel to die, not live.
Is Israel overextended? I mean, right now, Larry, they're claiming 40% of what a month ago was Syria as part of Israel.
Oh, absolutely. Look, and this is the other thing people have misjudged is that, initially with the fall of Bashar al-Assad, everybody's going, great victory for Israel, great victory for Turkey. Oh, big loss for Russia, big loss for Iran. Nonsense. One of the things Israel had in place with Bashar al-Assad, and they had penetrated Assad's intelligence and military leadership. They had Israeli agents at the top. So they knew what Iran was doing with the government of Syria. And Iran was not dealing covertly with Syria. They were open. It was an open diplomatic and military and intelligence exchange. So in a way, Israel had great insight. They had good vision. They could understand what was going on. Once that was eliminated, all of a sudden, there's no formal government for Iran to deal with. Iran's going to continue supporting Hezbollah. Well, guess what? There are smuggling routes throughout Syria and Iraq and Jordan that have existed for centuries. These tribes that are out there, and there are criminal organizations. Iran uses them. So now all of a sudden, Israel is blinded. It has, I would argue, less intelligence about what's going on the ground instead of more. And on top of it, it does not have an unlimited military force. It's still suffering casualties, as we talked about in Gaza. It's suffering casualties in the West Bank, and it suffered casualties in Beirut. I think that's one of the other motivations right now that you, at least from the IDF standpoint, that they're pressing for a ceasefire.
Larry, a pleasure, my dear friend. Thank you very much, as always.
Kofi, follow me.